Are you ready to knit your first sweater? Hopefully yes, because this video is all about knitting a sweater. Obviously, it doesn't have to be your first sweater. Maybe you've knitted a few before, but maybe you're looking for some tips to get a better result. Today, we're going to be knitting the warm-up sweater. It is a free pattern from Espace Tricot that you can get on Ravelry. The link will be down below. I did use the same yarn as the pattern recommend. It is the Drops Air, which is a blown yarn, very light to wear, but very warm. I absolutely adore it. I've been wearing it since I finished it. It was a joy to knit with. This video is long, so there will be chapters throughout the video to get you situated. I will tell you everything that you need to know from A to Z, starting with selecting the right size all the way to blocking and finishing your sweater. It is the next best thing to having an actual class. If you have questions during the video, don't hesitate to put a comment down below. I will be really happy to answer. First things first, I want you to go get a sweater in your wardrobe that you really like the fit of. And I want you to measure across here. Under the arm separation at the chest area, I want you to measure the garment you have and double that number in order to get a feel for which size you want to knit. The size you want to knit is gonna include a certain amount of ease. Ease is the amount that's past your body. So my body is a certain size and this sweater has positive ease. It is bigger than my body. Not everyone likes the same amount of positive ease, so that's why I'm telling you, go measure a sweater you like and then you'll be sure to knit a sweater that will be to your liking. Then you're gonna select the size in the pattern that is the one closest to that measurement. Knitting is stretchy. Don't worry if it's a little bit more or a little bit less than what your favorite measurement is, because it's all gonna be fine. The one thing that is crucial to get a sweater that fits is to get the right gauge. And you know you're gonna get the right gauge not by taking the same yarn and the same needles, because everybody's tension is different, but to get the yarn, the needles, and do a swatch. The only other video you'll need apart from this one to make a sweater is this one that tells you how to knit a gauge swatch in the round. I urge you to go check out that video. You could dive into making your sweater before you do a gauge swatch, but I really recommend doing one before starting. If your gauge does not match the pattern, go down a needle size or go up a needle size in order to get correct gauge before you start knitting to ensure that the result will be what you're looking for. That being said, I'm leaving you with this very long video, and as a little extra bonus while you're watching, maybe you can try and count the number of manicures I went through while knitting that sweater. Let me tell you, it's quite a few. I hope you enjoy all the tips and tricks I have for you. Let's start with our material. We're gonna need yarn. I'm using Drops Air, which is what is recommended in the pattern. You do not have to use this one if you don't want to. You can use any Aran or worsted weight yarn, which would be a medium or 4 thickness, depending on where you buy your yarn. And this one though is pretty affordable, and I really recommend you try it if you have access to it. The other thing you're gonna need is needles, obviously. And for the needles, you're gonna need circular needles. You can decide to have the multiple cable lengths in order to make this sweater. What I recommend if you go for multiple cable lengths is to have interchangeable tips where you can unscrew the tip and have different length cables. That's going to be the most I guess, economic way to do it. You're gonna need a size US 7 4.5 millimeter needle, and you're gonna need some size US 8 or 5 millimeter needle. If you'd rather use fixed needles, I recommend you use very long ones so you can do magic loop. Something like 100 centimeters would work really well in that situation. Again, 2 different size tips. You're also gonna need stitch markers. I have a huge amount, but you're probably only gonna ever use 4. And you could be using anything you have in your house, including little bits of yarn to do stitch markers. You really don't have to purchase stitch markers. And we're gonna need scissors and a tapestry needle to finish everything at the end. Let's jump into the actual knitting. Let's cast on for your sweater. I'm assuming here that you have made a gauge swatch. If you have not made a gauge swatch, you can still start your sweater, but you cannot come to me and say, Claudia, my sweater doesn't fit. Because knowing that your gauge is correct is what's gonna make your sweater the right size. So before you start on your sweater, if you haven't done one, go check out this video to make a gauge swatch in the round to make sure that your measurements are gonna be correct. I today am knitting the size 1. The pattern tells me to cast on 60 stitches, and in order to know how long of a tail I need for a long tail cast on, I like to wrap my yarn around my needle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. These are my smaller needles. So this is 10 stitches. Then I'll fold it on itself. This is going to give me 20 stitches. Then 20 times 2 is 40 stitches. And then 40 plus another length of that is 60. And then I like to give me a little bit of extra just in case. I'm going to have my tail towards me, put that on my thumb and my index finger, put everything in my hand to create this triangle shape, and I'm gonna be doing the long tail cast on. My needles goes on top towards me, first stitch is cast on. Now I'm doing this little slingshot motion like so, and I'm gonna go towards me. I'm gonna go in here as if it was a knit stitch on a needle, floop, and then I'm gonna go catch the yarn that's in the back and release the thumb. 1 stitch towards me, enter the stitch as if it's a knit stitch, go get the yarn in the back, pass it through, release. 3 towards me and through, release, let go. So this is the long tail cast on. I do it as a continental knitter, but if you wanted to, you could do it as an English style knitter. So you could hold the yarn that is attached to the ball in your right hand and then hold the yarn that is not attached in your left hand. Go like this. So from behind with your thumb, enter the stitch, knit the stitch, pass it through and release like so. It's the same cast on. We're basically knitting our first row as we cast on. Throughout this entire tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do everything continental and English style, so no worry if you're one or the other. All my stitches are casted on, and if you're using a short needle, you should be able to connect your stitches. The first round might be a little tight. It's okay. It happens. But if you can't, reach into this, you got to know that you're going to have a problem in the end because this should fit over your head. So if it doesn't fit on a needle, yeah. My cable is a little bit longer than the 16 inches called for in the pattern, so I know that I'm gonna have to stretch everything a bit more. And now the most important part when joining in the round is making sure that my stitches are facing all the same way. So right now I can see the little thread running along the bottom of my stitches. It's all inside my loop. If this happens here, it's very difficult. If we're not paying attention, we could absolutely miss that. Here I'm running along, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, it's good, and whoop, it's going over my needle and underneath. If I connect that, I'm gonna have a twist that will never undo. So I can put my needles back or my stitches back so they all run along the bottom. Great. This is the beginning of my round. I'm gonna use whatever I have that's some sort of round shape to mark the beginning of my round. Here it's this little light bulb. All right, and now I'm gonna start knitting the ribbing, and this ribbing that's called for in the pattern is a twisted rib, which is fun. It's a very cute detail. If you don't want to do a twisted rib, you can absolutely do a regular rib, which would be knit one, purl one. But this twisted rib is knit one through the back loop, knit one through the back loop, purl one. So here we go. First stitch through the back loop. That one is going to be the most tricky to do through the back loop because it's only a little twist. It's not an actual stitch that we made it by twisting the yarn, so sometimes the first one might be tough. And if you can't enter through the back loop, you can enter through the front loop and kind of bring your needle back. Here we go. First stitch, one, and then purl one, and then knit one through the back loop. So I'm entering in the back here. Purl one. On the first round, you're gonna have to shuffle your stitches around a little bit more than on the other rounds. It might take a little bit more time, but you really want to make sure that your first round is set up properly. Take the time to every once in a while stop and look at your stitches and make sure that you're doing the correct pattern, because once the first row is done, it's going to be easier to see. But right now I want to make sure that I have a knit stitch and then one with a bump, one without, one with, one without, one with. I'm going to keep going continental because that's my preferred method. So this was a knit stitch, purl, knit through the back, purl. And if there's a little gap here at the beginning, don't worry about that. We'll fix that later. All right, we've made it to the last stitch. And now, again, I'm gonna check to make sure that I haven't created any twist. It's possible that I've looked before and that, you know, somehow I still managed to put a twist in. Now is still time to undo the twist if there's one. So if you see a twist in your row, you don't have to undo everything. You can just kind of move the twist by flipping your needle. I don't have a twist, so I'm not going to do that. But second row is still a good time. And I still have this gap here. It's okay. It's going to come back to normal eventually. Doing the second row already will kind of close this gap. And at the end, I'm going to use this tail to close everything. So don't worry about it. Again, just make sure that your needles are long enough to join both ends. And now we can start knitting our ribbing and making sure that we follow our pattern by looking at what's underneath our needles. So purl, knit one through the back loop until we have 1 inch of neck ribbing. I've knitted about 1 inch of the collar. So when I measure it right here, it's a tiny bit more than 1 inch, and that's fine by me. Now I'm gonna be switching my needle to a larger needle. I have interchangeable tips, so what I'm gonna do is simply change the right hand side needle for the 5mm or US 8. And I prefer leaving the smaller needle on the other side for that first round, or else my stitches are going to be very difficult to push onto the left hand needle. If I were to change the needle completely, I would just pick up that new needle and start knitting directly onto it. I don't have to slide my stitches, just knit straight onto it. But for now, I'm gonna use this one. Where's my marker? It fell. So that first row is going to be a knit row, and it is also a setup row. Setup for what? Setup for the raglan increases. I'm going to be setting up markers around the neck so I can determine where my sleeves are going to be, where my front and my back is going to be. So when I look at my knitting, I'm going to be looking at it like this. This is the back of my right shoulder. I'm going to have my sleeve, put a marker, my front, put a marker, my left sleeve, put a marker, and then the back. So you're going to be following the size that you marked as your size. For my size, I have to knit 8 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. You really do want to make sure that your counts are correct on this row, because this row is going to be the foundation for your shoulder shaping. Now I have to knit 20, I believe. 22. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. This is a great time also while you're doing this. It makes you count your stitches again. 8 stitches for my sleeve. 21, 22, and I'm back to the beginning of the round marker. Perfect. I have the right count. I'm ready to do the short row shaping. The short row shaping is where we're going to be knitting across the sleeve to a certain amount of stitches after the beginning of the sleeve. Then we're going to turn our work around and start knitting across the sleeve again, the back, the sleeve, and come back to the front, but not all the way forward, just at the same point where we turn around. We're going to turn around and go back like this and go a little past our short row, and again, and a little bit past our short row, and come back. And what that's going to do is lift up the back of the neck so that the front can sit lower. That usually where we want our collar to be is a little bit lower on the front than in the back. Before actually I go into the short row shaping, if you are unsure that you can fix your mistakes, or that if you think that you might make mistakes, which is totally valid, everybody does, you can take a tapestry needle and just put in what we call a lifeline. A lifeline will allow you to unravel your work down to that precise point. So right now we know that the collar is done. It's fine. We like it. We don't want to undo it. So we can run this needle along the stitches underneath the cable. Make sure to not go through the stitch marker. And what that's going to do is, if we make a big mistake, we can unravel down to that point. And when we get to that point, the string is going to be holding my stitches, and I don't have to be scared of unraveling past where I want to. I'm using a sock yarn because it's a smaller yarn than what, I'm using for the sweater. And also it's a very smooth yarn. It's not going to catch. I don't want to use a fluffy, grippy piece of strand for that. I could use cotton. Some people use dental floss, but I feel like dental floss stretches a little bit too much. And when I pull on it to take it out, sometimes it breaks, and I find that annoying. So I just use whatever I have. If you have interchangeable needle, you could also, if you have a, now I have a lifeline. All right. Now, I didn't change my other needle yet, so I'm going to do that because we're going to be working back and forth. I need to make sure that both my needles are the larger size. So this is the right one. Oops. This is my beginning of the round. We're ready. It says, I'm just going to follow the instructions one at a time. Row 1, knit to the marker. I'm going to be careful not to knit into my lifeline. those are my sleeves. I'm going to slip my marker, and then it says to knit 3. Your size might say 4, so 3 or 4 here. Now it says work a GSR. GSR is German short row. It's a method you use to make sure that when you go from in the round to back and forth, it doesn't create a hole where you went the other way. How I work a GSR, I turn my work. I have my yarn in the front. I will move my stitch from the left needle to the right needle, and then I will pull my yarn back. It doesn't matter if I'm English style knitter or continental style knitter. I pull tight so I can see 2 strands of knitting on my needle, and those 2 strands are basically the other stitch underneath that's being lifted up. I bring my yarn to the front, and then I start row 2. Row 2 is purl to the marker, slip my marker, repeat from the asterisk 3 more times. So purl to the marker, so that's 1, slip the marker, 2, so 2 is going to be this marker here, and 3 is going to be this one. So after the sleeve, I'm going to stop purling, right? Here we go. If you're discouraged by the short row section, it really just is one of the most complicated part of knitting a sweater top down in the round. Don't be discouraged by it. If just follow the instructions line by line. Doesn't matter if you don't really understand where you're going with it, but if you keep watching this video, you'll see exactly why we're doing this. So I reach the marker, slip it, whoops, that's 2. And then a third time, purl to the marker, and slip the marker, 3. Then it says 2, purl 3, 1, 2, and 3, GSR. So GSR, I turn my work, and now even when I'm in the front, this is the front of my work, the right side. Even when I'm on the right side, I want the yarn to be in the front before I slip the first stitch onto my needle, purlwise, and then I bring the yarn to the back. And yes, I'm gonna have this lifeline here that's kind of in the way, it doesn't matter. And I pull it really tight. I even like to put my finger to help. And then I will do row 3. Knit to 1 stitch before the marker. For me, it's just 1 stitch. I'm at 1 stitch before the marker. Knit front and back, which is an increase. Increase is knit in the front of my stitch. Then I don't take the stitch off of the left needle. I go to the back, and then I take the back leg, and I knit through that back leg, and then I take it off my needle. I had 1 stitch, now I have 2. And I have this little purl bump that appeared underneath my increase. Slip the marker, knit front and back. I'll do it English style. Knit into the front of my stitch, go to the back, go inside the back of the stitch, and knit in the back. Take it off. So I have a little purl bump here, my original stitch, and another purl bump here. So I increased 2 stitches on either side of the marker. Now it says again to repeat from the asterisk 3 more times. So 3 more times mean knit to the marker, 1 before the marker, then knit front and back in the other one. That's 1. Then I'm gonna keep going. The beginning of the round marker is 2. And then this marker here is 3. So if I look at it and I analyze it a bit, it's going to be after my small section, which is the sleeve right here, that I'm going to stop. So one stitch before the marker, knit front and back, slip the marker, again knit front and back. That's one time. The repeat. So again, knit to the marker, one stitch before the marker, knit front and whoop, back, slip my marker, knit front and back, and keep knitting. That was 2. So it said 3 times. I get to the third marker, knit front and back, slip the marker, knit front and back. On my row 3, it says knit to 3 stitches beyond the GSR and work a GSR. The GSR is right here. I can see it. It's this funky, weird double stitch here on my needle. So I'm going to knit this stitch. This stitch has to be knitted as if it's one regular stitch. So I need to make sure that when I knit into it, I knit into the 2 strands. I have 2 strands that I'm going through, and I have 2 strands here on my needle, and I'm going to knit all of that together. And now I'm going to go 3 stitches beyond. Your size might be 4. 1, 2, 3. My GSR was right here. I knitted 3 more. I turn and I do a GSR. Yarn in the front, slip the stitch, bring the yarn over the needle to the back, making sure that you have 2 stitches here, and pull tight, bring it back forward and start purling across. So now we're at row 4, and row 4 says purl to the marker, slip marker. I can do that. Purl to the marker, slip marker. And then repeat 3 more times. So purl, and we can imagine that doing this 3 more times will bring us close to the GSR that we did in the row before. So that's 1. 2, 3. Then it says purl to 3 stitches beyond the GSR, work a GSR. So purl, I can see the GSR, it's right here. So again, if I'm going to do it this way, I can put my needle to purl, making sure I catch the 2 strands, and I knit them as 1 stitch. Then I go 3 past, 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Work a GSR. Turn my work. Bring the yarn forward. Slip the stitch to the right hand needle and pull real tight behind before I do my first stitch here. Now I'm going to be repeating those last 2 rows. So the row 3 and the row 4, I'm going to repeat them once more. So I'm going to go right side, wrong side, and I'll meet you back here. And don't forget to do your increases in the right side row, 1 stitch before the marker and then right after the marker. I've just knitted to the GSR, 3 stitches past the GSR. I'm going to turn my work, work my last GSR. And then the pattern says turn and knit to beginning of the round. Turn I personally turn my work before doing the elongated stitch. So what the designer mean is some people do the elongated stitch before turning. So we've turned, we're good. We're facing the right side, and now knit to the beginning of the round. Easy enough. We're back at the beginning of the round. As you can tell, I've augmented stitches, so now my needle is a little bit shorter than the circumference that I have, which was not necessarily the case before. It was pretty much equal. Now it's a little bit shorter. It's fine. I can keep working like that because I like having needles that are actually shorter, but it doesn't allow me to show you the shape as well. So we've got still our sleeves here. Now our front here is very short compared to our back. Look at all the knitting we did in the back versus almost none in the front. That's exactly what short rows are for. And now that we've done that, we're gonna start working in the round, and we're never gonna stop until the end. So no more going back and forth. We love it. If you feel confident now that this row, this section was well done, you can take out your lifeline if you do not want to have it there. And you can place it now under your stitches in this section, because we're starting a new section. That's a great place to decide to put a lifeline in if you want. So I'm going to take out my lifeline. See how easy that was? All right. This is what we're looking like. You can use the same lifeline, put it back in before this next section, or just keep knitting. Now, we're at the beginning of the raglan increases. It does say to switch to, it says larger. It should probably say longer needles when the stitches become too cramped. I'm still good for a while. So we're gonna be doing round one is knit front and back, knit to one stitch before the raglan, knit front and back, and repeat this 3 more times. So we're basically doing 8 increases, and we have 4 stitch markers. So we're gonna be doing those increases on either side of each marker. So knit front and back, knit to the next marker, actually to one stitch before, because we need to make an increase and we need a stitch to make this kind of increase. Knit front and back, slip the marker, knit front and back, keep knitting to the marker. These increases are great because you don't have to remember which one to do on which side. They are exactly the same, and you make them into the stitches that are next to the marker, both sides. Now we have this GSR that hasn't been knitted into. No problem. We're just going to make sure to take the 2 strands and knit into it. And we'll have the same thing on the other side. 1, 2, 3 here. And this one is right here. It might be a little funkier. It looks funky like this because it was made from the other side, from the wrong side. Here we go. Keep going. Before you do that row, you might want to count your stitches to make sure that you have the correct number. There's always going to be a stitch count at the end of every section to make sure you keep track. I skipped it. I should have not. I've been burned before where I didn't count my stitches at the end of a section, and yeah, that was not great. So count your stitches at the end of every section here, and an increase here, and we keep going just so you can see what happens. Yeah, I'm gonna keep going and show you in the next. So what we're gonna be doing for a few rows is alternate an increase row and then a plain knit row. I was talking to you, I forgot to do my increases here. I can see it because there is no little bump underneath my second stitch. So here, see how there's the little purl bump underneath my second stitch, and there's a little purl bump on the side. So these are all increases, and I did them. I was really smart. It's right underneath my needle or my cable. Here, no purl bump underneath. I didn't do my increases. What do? I just go back. I can unknit by putting my needle in the V underneath my stitch. You want to make sure that you're really looking at your knitting often when you're doing the shaping, because this can happen to the best of us. And the faster you pick up on it, the easier it's going to be to fix. So I'm going back. I'm going to do my increases. Okay, so the marker here. Okay, start again. Knit front, knit back, done. Knit front and knit back. Whew. Okay, back on track. So now you know what it should look like on an increase row, but here's how to tell if you are or not on an increase row. Now my stitch marker is stuck. Yay, okay. So my last increase is here. All right. So if you look under your needle, like I said, there's a little purl bump. It means that I just did an increase row. So now I don't have to increase. I just have to knit. When I come back around, if I see a V over that bump, it means that I just did a plain round. So it's time to increase. We're going to be repeating the increase row and the plain row a total of 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 times, depending which size you're making. That includes this first increase row. So what you might want to do is take another little stitch marker and mark that first increase that was part of this section. So this little purl bump here is the first increase that I did on this section. So that's 1. When I have 5 of those, I'm done. When you have however many, you're done. Because remember, we did some increases before during the short row shaping. So it would be kind of cumbersome to have to go back and count how many we did during the short rows and then blah, blah, blah. So it's better to just mark it and make sure that you know where you're at. Or if you have put a lifeline before this section, you would also easily know. I'll come back when I've knitted my 10 rows, 5 repeats of row 1 and 2. I'm saying row, I should be saying round. Okay, so we've knit round 1 and 2 a total of a certain number of times. For me, it was 5. I have my first one here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I knit that last round without increase, which is the V stitch underneath my needle. I'm ready to do the second part of my raglan, and that one is going to be a little bit different, where I'm going to be doing 4 different rows. First row is the increase row that is going to increase 8 stitches, so it's exactly the same as row number 1 in that first section. We're going to be increasing on both sides of all the stitch markers. Then we're going to knit a full round without increase. We're good. And then the third round, we're going to be doing 4 increases only. So we're increasing only on the body, which means that we're leaving those sleeve stitches alone and we're increasing on the body. So here, we're increasing here at the other side of the front. We're not increasing in between those markers here for the sleeve, and we're increasing here and at the end of the round here. Whoop. So let's do it. What it's gonna do is that we are going to increase the body faster than the sleeves. So we're going to end up having a sweater that has a bunch of positive ease in the body, which is the cozy, sweatshirty feel we want, but our arms, our sleeves are not going to be massively wide. If we keep increasing at the same rate everywhere, then we'll get a sweater that's a little bit either ease on the body will be a little bit less if we want to have normal size sleeve, or we're going to end up with really big balloony sleeves and the amount of positive ease we want on the body. So that's why this one has a different rate of increase. Some sweaters have less complicated increase patterns where we always increase on the body and sleeves the same way. But I really, really wanted this sweater because of the cozy fit of it. So really all you have to do is keep track of which row you're on. You should be able to do that by marking your increases or reading your knitting. So we'll finish this row. Again, this is a new section. So if you want to put a lifeline in, go ahead and put a lifeline. You can also count your stitches to make sure it fits with the ones on the pattern. We're getting to the front again, or not the front, the beginning of the round. All right, what I'm gonna do is put a marker. I'm gonna use the same one since it's here, but you could use an extra one, obviously. I'm gonna put it right here in my purl bump like I did in the last section. This is my row number 1. I have a row number 1, then I'm gonna do a full round of knitting, and then now I know that after this row number 1, the next row of increase is the row number 3, and I have to only do 4 increases. I can write it down on a notebook, but personally, just by looking at my stitches, I can see, and by adding little markers here, it will help me make sure that I'm on track. I'll get back with you once I've knitted this entire first 4 rows. Okay, I'm at row 3. I know it because this is my row 1. I just did my row 2. Row 3, I do not increase on the sleeves. These are the sleeves. No increases here. Now I slip the marker and I increase here because now I'm in the front of my sweater. And I'll knit to 1 stitch before the next marker, and I'll still be in the front, and I'll have to increase. If you have a bunch of bulb stitch markers like mine, you could get yourself a little color code and put, a red marker right here to tell you, or a green marker right here to tell you that you have to increase, a red marker in the middle of the sleeve to tell you that you do not. Okay, increase. Now I'm on my sleeve. Again, I could put a marker here to tell me, hey, this is the sleeve. Or I don't increase. Slip the marker. That's the back. I increase. And I'm at the end of the back, so I increase. Now I do a full row round without increasing. I know that because this was my increase round here. This V right here is the V that created this stitch. So that was row 1, row 2, row 3, and that's row 4. So row 4 is a no increase row. And now when I get back to my next increase row, I can tell right away that I have a bunch of rows here without increases. So now I have to increase. And here, I have an increase right here. And this one keeps going the same rate. So I have to look whether I'm on the side of the marker that is a steady rate of increase, or am I on the side of the marker that has less increases? And that's how I'm going to be able to tell for sure that I'm doing the right thing. See here, no increases here while there's an increase right here. That's great. That's what we want. Okay, after doing those 4, while I finish doing the 4th row, I'm gonna have to do those 4 rows a total of 10, 11, 12, 14 times. Again, you can put a marker in each and every single one of the sleeve increases, so you can count them as you go, or you just leave that one and you count them every once in a while. And also make sure you stop every once in a while and count how many stitches you have. I like to count my stitches every once in a while to see if I have the same amount on my sleeves and on my 2 sleeves, and then on my front and back, because technically I should have exactly the same amount on the left sleeve and the right sleeve, and the same amount on the front and the back. And if those numbers don't match up, I have to look at my knitting and go, wait a second, what doesn't match? This is good. Okay, that's where I started knitting the increases at a different pace. Where am I missing something, or where did I put something extra? 1 or 2 stitches won't make a big difference, so don't worry too much about it. But obviously if you have, 4 or 5 stitches difference, that's gonna start looking a little lopsided and wonky. So we'll keep going like that. Going to take a little while. That part takes some time and concentration, but I'll meet you back when we're ready to split the sweater for the sleeves. when we've tried on our sweater and we know that the depth is fine and the width is fine for what we want, we're gonna have to split for the sleeves and body. So we remember that the first part here from marker to marker was a sleeve. Right now I'm on the needle I used to try on my sweater, but I could also be on waist yarn, I could be on many different things. So the first step actually is to put the sleeve stitches onto waist yarn or something to hold my stitches. So what I'm gonna do is use this thing which is called a barber cord. In France they also called it a Scooby-Doo. I don't know how in the States else we could call it, but it's a little tubing that holds on to the needle. So you push it really far onto the needle and then it won't come out. You have still to be quite careful. And I'm gonna slip all the stitches that were in the sleeve, so until this next marker, onto this. You could also be using, obviously, some waist yarn. So just with a needle and waist yarn, and just put everything onto a waist yarn that's long enough to hold your stitches, because those are going to be waiting. We're going to do the sleeves last. And now I'm struggling with my cable because it's a little kinked. It's okay. If also you had just a shorter needle, you could put your stitches on just a shorter needle. And now I'm at the other marker, so I can pull this, take it off by squeezing and twisting. And now I'm just gonna put a little knot in this so it doesn't come undone. And those stitches are on hold. Now, I don't have to keep that marker there. What I do need to do though is my marker here that was the beginning of the round, I take it off and I'm gonna have a new beginning of the round, which is gonna be underneath the sleeves. So for the underneath the sleeve, I'm gonna have to cast on 4 stitches for my size. So what it says is with a backward loop cast on, it's the simplest one. Just hold my yarn, I bring my thumb like so, and I just slip it onto the needle. I will cast on 2 stitches for my size, then put my marker as a new beginning of the round and cast on 2 more. Here we go. And now I'm ready to join to the front of my sweater. So all those stitches here, we won't be using them at all. And now I'm gonna knit all my stitches up to the next marker. And yes, as you can tell, I'm knitting straight from the needle that I used to try on my sweater. If your needle was a little tight at this point, you were putting a lot of stitches on a smaller circumference needle, this moment is going to feel really good because you're putting all the sleeves on hold. So now you're back to just your body circumference, not your entire, torso and shoulders. So this is the marker for the sleeve. I'm going to take it off. Now I'm going to put the next sleeve section on hold, and this time, because I have it next to me and because why not show you, I'm going to use a mini circular. I have this set of mini circulars that I love to use for sleeves. So if I decide to put my sleeve on hold on a mini circular, basically what happens is if I want to use this mini circular for the sleeve later on, I would already have it ready to go. But if you don't have mini circulars, don't worry about it. We're going to do our sleeves magic loop as well. And actually those sleeves are quite big. You might even be able to use a 14, 16, don't remember, a 16-inch needle for the sleeves, which is basically the size we use to make hats usually. So now I have this sleeve onto another needle, and what I like to do, because those are interchangeable, is I'll use this to tie them together so I don't lose any stitches. And here you go. These are my underarm stitches. I could take off even the tips so they don't bother me, but I don't have the key with me right now, so I'm gonna just leave them there. Then I'm gonna cast on again 4 stitches. So I'm gonna do the backwards loop. I'm very much used to doing it with my right hand, but obviously it's possible to do through the right hand. Wait a second, I'd have to know here. So if you have your strand like this, you can just cast on like that. So you just have to kind of twist and enter from the bottom. That's 3, and that's 4. I'm sure there are many ways to do this cast on. And now I get to knit to the beginning of the round. And believe it or not, now we only ever just knit in the round all the way down to the length of the body that we want, minus the width of ribbing that we want to do. So the pattern itself states that you should be knitting the body until it measures, 7 to 11.5 inches from the underarm. So from the place that we stopped knitting the sleeve here, it's not your underarm, but the body's underarm. But what I want to tell you though is try it on as you go, or measure it against a sweater that you like. And you can also obviously count your stitches here at this point and put a lifeline after doing that first full row of knitting. So now I'm almost back to my beginning of the round. When I start here, I'll do a full row and then I would put a lifeline. So if I mess up something, I can come back to the place where I split for the sleeves. All right, I'll see you in quite a few hours when I'm done knitting the body. We're now at the point where we're going to be doing the ribbing. I obviously tried it on a few times. I measured how long I wanted my sweater to be compared to a sweater that I really like, knowing that I was going to add 2 inches of ribbing. If you don't have a sweater you want to be modeling it on, just try it on as you go and you'll be fine. Don't worry about my nails. I'm gonna be doing my manicure after this video. We're gonna change the needle. So the pattern asks you to use the smaller needle in a longer cable. I'm gonna be using those here. This is not my favorite cable, but this is the one I have. And so I will simply pull this out a little bit and I will start knitting the ribbing, which is a knit through the back loop and purl 1, knit through the back loop and purl 1, knit through back loop and purl 1 all along. You should hopefully still have a even number of stitches, so at the end you should be on a purl. Obviously take the time to really look at what you're doing every once in a while. It's highly frustrating to get to the end of your ribbing and notice that you're finishing on the wrong stitch, which means that somewhere along the way you did 2 stitches in a row that were purl or 2 stitches in a row that were knit. So look at it every once in a while, make sure that all your purls are one away from each other. And if you have to go back, when I rib back from a twisted stitch, I want to make sure that I put my needle from behind in that hole so it untwists the stitch. So keep going. And the pattern tells you to knit 2 inches of ribbing. Obviously, if you'd like to do more than 2 inches or less than 2 inches, don't worry about it. Just do what is good to you. I'm back with my 2 inches of ribbing and I'm ready to cast off. So I'll take off the marker, and no, you don't absolutely need a fancy bind off in order to bind off the bottom of a sweater. You're just gonna wanna make sure that your bind off is not too tight. We're gonna use a regular in pattern bind off. So I'm gonna go inside my stitch. I'm gonna knit that stitch. I'm gonna make it a little bit looser than what I'm used to. And I'm gonna do the next stitch and I'm gonna keep it quite loose as well. And then I'm gonna pass that first stitch over this next stitch while holding on to it with my pinky so it doesn't tighten up. Because if I pull right now, it's gonna pull on this stitch, but it's also gonna pull on the stitch underneath, which is how we end up with a tight bind off. Again, I'm gonna knit the stitch as I would, which is a twisted stitch. And I'm holding on to this yarn to make sure that it doesn't tighten too much. And I'm gonna give it some loose. See how big this stitch is here? It's quite big compared to the needle. And then I'm gonna pass the next one over and make sure I keep tension here and making sure I keep this stitch loose. Don't worry, I'll do it English style as well. So loose, bind off, and keep it loose. And then your bind off won't be too tight for your sweater, I promise. So we're here. We're gonna knit this first stitch here, and I can hold on with my other finger if I'm English style knitter and I hold my yarn with the left. Find what works for you, but just make sure to keep some extra in those stitches. You could also decide to use a bigger needle to do this bind off, but again, the important thing is to not pull here, because whether or not you had a big needle, it's gonna come and pull on this stitch right here, which is not attached to a needle. So it doesn't matter whether you have big or small needle if you end up pulling too hard. So here and here. Keep it big, and once in a while come and check that this is not so small that it's gonna create a very cinched in waist. At the same time, it's a sweater. If you want it to be cinched more at the ribbing, it doesn't really matter, but ideally we're keeping it loose. If you want to look for a different way to cast off, you absolutely can, but this is definitely the fastest of all the bind offs that you could do at the bottom of your sweater. And it's gonna look like this. I'll meet you at the end here to show you how to join the end of your bind off. I have one stitch left on my needle. I bound off the last stitch. What I like to do to make sure I have a clean connection here is I'll make this stitch bigger. I'll cut the yarn somewhere around here so I have enough yarn to weave everything in. I will take my darning needle, and instead of pulling that yarn all the way through the stitch, I will actually put the entire loop on my darning needle. I'll bring this yarn to the back. I will find the base of my first stitch here. So I have little V's. I'll find the first and I'll go underneath the two strands and pull that to the back. And then I can put my yarn, my tail through that loop and pull. And to me, this is the perfect connection here where you really can't see much. It's very subtle where I finished and started my round. So now I can right away, so I don't have to do it later, because you'll thank me later if you've done it right away. I'm gonna weave in my end. I'm gonna take this, and I like in the ribbing to simply go along a column here and just kind of twist it all the way up my ribbing. And this is gonna create so much friction, I really don't have to do anything else. It's never coming out of there, and you really can't see it in the front. So that's my favorite way to bind off in ribbing. Then I can cut it, not too short, so it doesn't come and poke back in the front. And now I'm ready to do the sleeves. When it's time to do your sleeves, you might have the 16-inch circular needles that are recommended in the pattern in order to work the sleeve, but I have the smallest size sweater here and I don't really like knitting on a 16-inch. I feel like it's a little bit, it stretches too much. So I'm going to use the same needles I was using for the body, and I'm going to show you how I magic loop. I'm going to use my 4.5 millimeter needle to put these stitches back onto my needle, but don't worry, I'm going to change back to the 5 millimeter after. It's just because I want to make sure that it's easy to put my stitches back on my needle. This barber cord here, that's how they're called, makes it really easy to put it back on, but obviously you're going to do the same thing. Just slide your stitches back onto your needle if you're using a waste yarn. And I'm kind of splitting it halfway-ish. I'm not really calculating. You could be counting and doing exactly halfway, but I don't really care if it's halfway or not. So all my stitches are back on my needle, and I have kind of half of my stitches on one side and kind of half of my stitches on the other. And we're gonna be starting magic loop. I'm gonna change this 4.5 millimeter needle for a 5 millimeter, which was my main fabric needle. And where's my little tightening tool? Here it is. Tighten it. And since I'm never gonna go back and forth for the sleeves, I'm gonna keep that 4.5 millimeter here. It doesn't matter. Now, I'm going to magic loop. If you've never magic loop before, we have half here, half there, and we have one loop on one side, and we're going to create another loop on the other side by just pulling just enough to get another loop here without undoing this loop. If your cable is a little bit too short, you might not be able to do that. It's ideal with a long cable. Mine is barely long enough. I should probably change it, but I'm gonna keep going. Here I have my stitches that I cast on when I did my body. So those stitches are the ones I'm gonna be picking up. My pattern tells me for my size to pick up 2 stitches starting from the middle of the cast on, knit around, and then pick up 2 again and place a marker. What I like to do is pick up 1 more on both sides. So pick up 3, knit around, pick up 3, and start knitting, because then it's going to close off the potential holes that I might get when I'm knitting the sleeves. I have those stitches. Technically, I could be picking up here, here, and here, and here under those little kind of bars that I see. And if I poked my needle through there, then I would get stitches. But I like to try and match my V's. So you see my V's here, and this is kind of halfway between this side of my sleeve and this side of my sleeve. So I'm going to poke, instead of poking under this bar, I'm going to poke in the middle of a column of V's. So I'm poking here, and then I'm going to take my yarn, fold it in half to get me a little starting loop. I'm gonna lay it on my needle and pull it through. That's 1 stitch. Then I'm gonna go to the next column of V's, poke in the middle, and then get my yarn. And I'm gonna leave a good tail here because I might need it to close little unsightly holes at the end. And pull. So technically I would be ready to start kind of knitting from this needle, but I want to close this hole here. So I'm gonna take, what I like to take is a bar, not right here where everything connects, but even lower than that. So this one, I like that one. And then I'm gonna take this bar in the middle here. That's a big hole. I'm gonna put those 2 together on my needle to knit them through the back loop. And generally it helps close the gap. So start knitting, and I'm getting a pretty nice, like there's a little gap here. I could finagle it a little bit more, but I'm fine with that. Everything's gonna get placed once we wash it. There are more precise way to close this hole, but I generally just kind of do whatever feels right at the moment. And anyway, it is under your armpit. It is not gonna be seen very much. So I'm knitting all the way through to the end of this needle. And now this needle is free. I'm gonna turn my work. I'm gonna put my stitches onto my needle, and then I'm gonna pull, making sure the yarn is not creating this weird yarn over here. I'm gonna pull the back needle and create once again those two loops. And I'm gonna start knitting. And that's what magic loop is about. Just 2 loops, one on both sides. When I get to the end of that needle, I'm gonna attempt to close this little hole first. So I'm gonna knit this last stitch. I have a bunch of stuff here happening, so I'm gonna try and close it as best I can by picking up. I usually backtrack, so I'll check where I picked up my first stitch. It comes out of right here. So I'm gonna pick up 1 here. That's 1, that's 2. So here is where kind of there's a hole that's gonna be happening. So I'm gonna pick up this bar here, maybe from the back. Whoop. And then I'm gonna pick up another bar kind of below here. See how it's not a very precise scientific way of doing it, and I'm fine with that. And then I'm gonna bring this needle in the front so I can knit those 2 through the back loop. And this is a pretty unsightly hole, so I'm gonna do it again. And I'm gonna take something else to try and close that hole. So I'm gonna take this one and then this one and try it again. And that's better. Here you go. I just tried one, didn't work, tried another, worked better. Now, before I shift my magic loop again, I'm going to pick up the next 2 stitches. So in the column here under 2 bars, knit that stitch. In the next column under 2 bars, pick up and knit that stitch. And now I have my first stitch that's right here ready for me. So again, magic loop means that I'm turning my work. I'm putting all the stitches that were on hold onto the needle, and then I'm pulling the other needle to create 2 loops, one on the right, one on the left, and I start knitting. Now I'll do it English style. My yarn in magic loop should always come from in between my cable and my needle. It's right here. I'm not creating any kind of extra yarn over in the back here. And I start knitting. If magic loop is too much for you, the 16-inch circular needle, or maybe even a mini circular needle, might be your best friend. And then now I have to remember that I have 2 extra stitches. So what I'm gonna do is when I do my next round, I'm gonna decrease that stitch. I'm approaching the underneath of the arm, so the beginning of the round. I'm gonna right away decrease the extra stitch that I made, which was I picked up a third stitch right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a slip slip, knit to decrease that. So that's 1 stitch decrease. And then I'm gonna do my magic loop. And on this first row here, oops, I'm going to knit 2, 1, 2, and this is the extra stitch that I made, so I'm gonna knit 2 together with the first stitch of the row, and now I should have the right amount of stitches for my pattern. Next thing I'm gonna do is, because I'm gonna be knitting 2 sleeves, I ideally want to have sleeves that are the same. So I'm gonna count my rows. And my preferred method to count my rows in sleeves, anything that I have to match, is to, instead of just measuring, which can be kind of altered by pulling on one, pulling on the other, what I'm gonna do is find where I grabbed my first stitch, which was, it's difficult to see because it creates such a neat join here, but my pickup is, I'm pulling on my yarn. This is my pickup row. I'm gonna take a marker and I'm gonna put a marker on that first stitch. So that tells me this is the row where I picked up under the arm. And then I can start counting my rows, and I'm gonna add a marker every 10th row to make sure that when it's time to make the second sleeve, I can easily count the number of rows that I made on this sleeve. I'll get back to you when I've done a little bit more knitting. So I said I was going to put a marker every 10th round, but because my pattern is actually telling me to do decreases in this sleeve, I will count my rows starting here. So this is my pickup row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm counting the one on my needle. So I've made 11 rounds. It's time to decrease for my size. So I'm knitting 1, knit 2 together, and then I'll knit around 2-3 stitches before the end. And 3 stitches before the end, I will do a slip, slip, knit, slip, slip, and knit through the back loop, knit 1, and I'm back. So this was my decrease row, and I'm gonna put another marker here to tell me that I've done 1 decrease row. For my size, I need to do 3 more, but it really depends on which size you are making. So I like to put my marker in that stitch that I just made on my needle, because I know that this is my decrease row. When I start counting my rows to know if I'm at the decrease row, I will count this row. So this is the row I decreased in. I don't count it. I start here 1, and then I'll keep counting up until I hit 11 or the number that you have, and then I can make another decrease row. So technically there are 12 rows in that repeat, 11 knit rows and then the decrease row, which means that it makes 12. So I'll do all that. Once I'm done doing the decreases, keep knitting like that until I get a length that is good for me before doing my ribbing. I recommend you try it to see if you're at the right place or not. It's really something that is highly personal to everyone. And I'll see you when it's time to do the ribbing. Done with my second sleeve. I counted all of my stitch markers here and they match these. A little trick for making sure that you're making your 2 sleeves the same length is when I'm counting my twisted rib, I start at the stitch that's just above the first twisted one, because when we knit a row, we twist the stitch below. So this was my first row of twisted rib. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I have my bind off. I did the same thing on the other side. I did my bind off as I did for the bottom of the sweater. Now I have this one leftover loop at the end. I'm gonna cut and weave that in. I'm gonna have to weave in the one from the collar. And that was my cast on. So I like to make sure that the join here is neat. So I'm gonna bring it back. Right now it's coming out of here. I'm gonna bring it to the base here of the loop next to it and just give it a little extra support here so it doesn't show where I started my round. And again, weave it in through. See, I prefer going here on this side of the V, which, because it's not an upside down V, it's a regular V. It's the right leg. Here we go. Snip it. If your yarn is really slippery, maybe you want to keep weaving a little bit farther, but my yarn is very sticky, so I don't really need to give it more than that. And then we're going to go inside the sweater. First of all, to find the armhole here, I have my yarn that I added. The armhole is a place of high friction, so I just go and kind of bring it into some stitches. If I have a bigger hole on one side or the other, I can also use this yarn. This is not a big hole at all. I would honestly leave it there, but I'll show you what I do. When I have a hole on one side, I'll go underneath a few strands around that hole like this and go back underneath itself to tighten it up and close that little hole. If it bothers you, it wouldn't have bothered me, to be honest. And then I can just maybe come back here, and then I have this little spot that's woven in, cut. Same thing on the other side. And then the next thing is weaving in the little bits that are hanging loose here because we changed ball of yarn. One of the ways I like to do this is I'll find where that yarn is coming from so I don't make an X. Like, I don't want to cross it because it might show in the front. I'm going to keep it going the way it was coming from, and I'm just going to duplicate stitch my stitches. So here I'm going to follow the trail. It's coming here. It's going to go down into this little U shape, and then I follow the yarn into the little umbrella that's right across, diagonally across, like this, and then try not pull too tight to not create tension issues. And then I'm going to follow this U shape into the umbrella and into the U shape I was in before. So we're kind of drawing those stitches. It's going like this, and I'm going down and down into the one in diagonal, and then follow it and go up and up. Follow, down and down. Follow, up and up. And, 3 stitches is plenty. Could be 2, depending on the stickiness of your yarn. And then I'm going to snip it. You don't need to make knots. Knots are not knots are not what I like to do. So again, this one is coming the other way around. It's going to the right. So down and down. And then I follow the trail up and up. Follow the trail here, down, and it's going down here. Diagonal and up and diagonal. Here we go. Snip it. I'm going to do the same off camera for the other changes. Then I will take off all the markers because I don't want to risk having rusty spots when I give it a bath. And I'm gonna put water in either a bowl or my sink. Warm water, can be even hot water. I'm gonna put a soap. If you have a wool soap that is a non-rinse wool soap, go ahead, use that one. It's the best one to use. But if you have any other, gentle soap, it can be shampoo. And then you'll put your sweater in the water and you'll let it be for at least 15 minutes. But what I do is I forget it in my sink until the water is completely room temperature. And then I'll take it out of the bath, give it a squeeze, rinse it if need be, if I put a rinse soap, and then I'll lay it flat to dry. And once it's completely dry, then I can wear my sweater. That's it. You've knitted a sweater. And I hope it was a fun experience because for me, after I knit my first sweater, I went on to knit a whole lot more. I really hope you learned a thing or two during this video. And when you finish knitting your sweater, don't hesitate to post your results online. It can be on TikTok, on Instagram, and tag me at Clotricot with an S with the hashtag warmupsweater. If you're still interested in learning some more, here are some videos that you might want to watch. In the meantime, stay warm and cozy with your brand new sweater. Happy knitting. Bye.